Hello there, Ramblers, and welcome back to another gripping instalment of Reese Rambles, my weekly podcast all about the latest comings and goings, movings and shakings, and indeed all the rest of it in the worlds of vintage and retro computing, gaming, and technology. And indeed, independent filmmaking this week, which we will talk about in a second. But yes, welcome to another weekend. A little bit chillier here in the UK. It was certainly a bit warmer last weekend, but the sun is very much out again, and spring is still very much springing. So I certainly can't complain too much. But yes, last weekend and this indie filmmaking connection, which I did say I would talk a little bit more about this week. Obviously mentioned it last week. And it was a rather grand day out, I will say. So this was all to do with this, Turn Back, which is Ashens, Stuart Ashen, of course, the British YouTuber, best known for reviewing bits of tat on his iconic brown sofa. This is his latest movie. Now, you might be familiar with his two previous movies. There was The Quest for the Game Child, I believe it was called. Very amateur, low-budget action comedy type film, but very, very funny, very entertaining for anyone like me who has far too much tat, and it was basically all about him on his quest to find the Game Child, which was this very rubbish Game Boy knockoff from back in the day. I do have one. I'm just having a look at my monitor here to see if I can see it. Oh, there it is. That's my Game Child there up on the shelf, which I actually bought immediately off the back of seeing Ashen's first film. So there we go, I've had it there ever since as a bit of a homage to one of my inspirations. His second film, of course, was the Polybius Heist, which was all about an arcade machine that, this legendary arcade machine that was kind of hypnotising and brainwashing people and stuff and had like these mind control, I don't know, some government experiment or something. It's a long time since I've seen it, but that was also a really great film and, of course, a step up in production from his first film, which was great to see. But the third one is another really big leap still. So this is a folk horror told in reverse, as it is described here on the Kickstarter page. I did back this. I was one of the higher tier backers. I always like to support fellow creators and particularly British creators as well. I've been a big fan of Ashens for a long time, and he's been a big inspiration on my own channel as well. So only seemed fair as someone who enjoyed his previous work. And this is where we were. So this is Cold Harbour Blue. In fact, there he is, the man himself, looking rather concerned. This is the second test screening of the day, which I was invited to. And also some fellow YouTubers there as well. So I'll talk a little bit about the venue first. This really nice little kind of indie cinema that was just tucked away around a corner under a railway arch. You know, every few minutes you could hear a train going overhead, which in a couple of places actually kind of tied up with the action that was happening on screen and added a bit to the atmosphere. So maybe they could edit some of those in on the final thing. I don't know, or have it as like an alternative soundtrack or something, so you could get the pre-production screening experience. I don't know. Elliot Cole from the Retro Future was there. First time seeing him in real life, so it was great to see him looking well. Of course, another channel that I am a big fan of. And also I met up with Mr. Timberwolf and also Dudley of Yesterzine as well. Two of my very good internet friends. I have met them quite a few times at events and things before, chat to them all the time, and they both have rather excellent YouTube channels. So Timberwolf is... he has a bit of a focus, he has a bit of an obsession with stuff like Transport Tycoon and stuff like that, but yeah, it covers old games and things, and he has his own kind of quite unique and interesting style, so well worth checking out. Also, really nice chap as well. And Dudley of Yesterzine being like a magazine format type show that basically looks at old games and things. And quite recently, he did cover the Atari ST versus the Amiga debate, which led to quite a lot of controversy, which was rather excellent to see down in the comments section. But yeah, I met up with those two guys, completely unexpected, and ended up sitting with Dudley, and he very kindly bought me a pint, which was very nice. And we got to watch this folk horror movie together. Now, of course, the film wasn't complete. This was a test screening of a version that they described as, I think, about 80% done. So there were some placeholders and things on screen where they were going to put the visual effects in to do with the kind of main antagonist of the film. There was also bits of audio that were kind of completely out of whack, colour grading that hadn't been done, so it was a little bit inconsistent looking in places. All stuff to be expected with a film that wasn't finished, but fundamentally, stuff like the cinematography and the acting and just the story, like the script and stuff, were all very, very, very solid. And I think this has all the makings of actually a truly excellent film. I'm not into horror films at all. and I still found it very, very compelling and a very interesting viewing. I think the story's great. As far as the feedback on the day was concerned, obviously I don't want to give too much away, but it does describe itself as a folk horror told in reverse, and that is very much the format of the film. So starts off with kind of the big climax, the big, kind of, I wouldn't know how to describe it, but, you see how the film is going to end right at the very beginning. Really trying not to spoil this. And then the story that leads up to that point is told as kind of a series of flashbacks, and you kind of keep jumping back in time, and all the threads kind of start to kind of slowly come together and interweave, and then you get this this really big ending that kind of pulls everything together. I thought the ending was, in particular, was very, very good. The only kind of main feedback from the day, I think, was that it was quite hard to follow where you were supposed to be in the timeline. And I think a lot of that was just due to editing that still needs to be done, visual and audio cues, things like that, that is kind of missing from the film. But still, I thought it was very enjoyable, and I think the story is very good. So I'm very excited about this. I would, I'm very keen to see it finished and see kind of where it progresses, and just a great insight into the filmmaking process as well. I've never been invited to anything like this in the past. Of course, I know the story, I know the twists, and I know kind of the details of it now, so hopefully that won't take too much away from my enjoyment of it. There were they were A/B testing. I did mention that there were 2 test screenings on the day, and apparently the first screening was ever so slightly different to ours as well, although I'm not quite sure how. But that's quite interesting. And basically, I've said that I'm not a horror fan, but if you think of stuff like The Wicker Man, proper kind of cult, classic British folk horror type stuff, you're very much in the right ballpark with this, although it does have some quite interesting twists. And apparently, according to one person in the audience who was apparently a massive, massive fan of this genre, apparently all sorts of homages and bits of inspiration from all sorts of other films in that genre as well. So if you're a fan of that genre in particular, there is a lot in here to enjoy. So anyway, that's my gushing review of the unfinished version of Turn Back, the new film from Stuart Ashen. Not quite sure what the timeline is on this. Not quite sure what they are aiming for the release date. The last update was back in January 2026. Like I say, I am a backer of this, so I should probably know a bit more about it. But anyway, that's how I spent my weekend. Last weekend, I was down in Brixton, very interesting part of London. Very kind of creative place, all sorts of arty types about, and really nice kind of outdoor market, craft breweries, that kind of stuff everywhere, and just a very cool experience all round. So all the best to Stuart and the rest of the team. There are some kind of Hollywood types working on this as well, hence the cinematography and the amazing kind of set design and the acting and stuff. And really kind of looking forward to it. So that is that, but I've waffled on far too long about that. I hope there's something of interest in there for you out there. And I think we'll, perhaps have a little sponsor spot, because it's been a couple of weeks since I've done one of those. And then we'll jump into the rest of the stories for this week's Ramble. And here it is, the sponsor spot. So, Reese Rambles, as you may know, is sponsored by PCBWay.com, who have over 11 years of experience in the PCB fabrication business. But that's not all they offer. Oh no, they have some complimentary services as well. Stuff like 3D printing, CNC machining, sheet metal fabrication, and injection molding, to name but a few. So, if any of those, or indeed the classic PCB fabrication offering of theirs, are of interest for your next project, please do check out the link to PCBWay.com down in the description. It helps to support Reese Rambles and, of course, the other channels and the rest of the community that they are very well known for supporting. Thanks again, PCBWay. Now, let's get on with the stories for this week. The Atari ST, a rather wonderful machine released way back in 1985, should be no stranger to those of you who are regulars here at Reese Rambles. Of course, it was the first computer, or one of the first computers we ever had in our household. We did have a very short-lived and ill-fated Acorn Electron for a very short amount of time before that. But 1991, my parents went out and they purchased an Atari STE, which I have just here on permanent display as part of my studio set. Of course, a massively important part of my story and what got me here today. And yeah, of course, it was becoming a little bit long in the tooth by 1991, but still an impressive machine and one that I have very, very fond memories of playing games on and things like that. But of course, the ST was originally intended as a bit of an Apple Macintosh competitor, really. I mean, it was nicknamed the Jackintosh, after, of course, Jack Tramiel, the ex-Commodore guy who had recently taken ownership of Atari and kind of took charge of getting the ST out of the door. Of course, he knew that the Amiga was coming. That is part of the story as well. And he wanted to get something out to kind of get something to market quicker that would be quite similar and hopefully steal a bit of their market share as well. And we all know how that went. We don't need to go over that debate once more. But as a kid, having the Atari STE and getting those ST format magazines every month, I remember flicking through the pages and reading about all this exciting upcoming stuff from Atari. Of course, as a kid, I had no idea what was going to happen to Atari. The quite famously imploded in the early 90s, as we all know, as history tells us. But one of those things was the Jaguar, which I am now proud to call myself an owner of. I know it's been a bit of a joke as far as the history of games consoles is concerned, but it's a very interesting machine and it does have at least a few interesting games. And as an Atari fan, I think it's quite historically important. The other thing that I remember reading about quite a lot, eventually getting to the point, was the Falcon 30, of course, the successor to the ST machines, and very much an STE on steroids. So it had the Motorola 68030 CPU, which was a massive step up from that original 68000. It had all sorts of custom sound and graphics hardware on board and was, by all accounts, a very powerful machine for its day when it was released way back in 1992. And did get a bit of a foothold in the world of music production, which of course the ST had also kind of been quite successful in, thanks to its MIDI ports. Of course, I've got to mention the MIDI ports. Something that carried through to the Falcon. And then, of course, I think when Atari fell apart, a German company picked up the rights to the Falcon. It's not my area of expertise. But unfortunately, because of the untimely demise of Atari, the Falcon itself never really got a chance to catch on. The Amiga was quite big at the time, of course, and then, of course, PC compatibles, IBM PC compatibles, DOS-based machines, Wintel machines, completely and utterly destroyed all of that market. And that was the end of that. So that was a very quick history lesson at the early 90s in the world of computing. But I do have a bit of a connection to the Falcon, so I made a video a while back. Of course, it would be remiss of me not to promote one of my own videos, but this is a very old one. This was 5 years ago, and it was a Sparrow prototype, Atari Sparrow, also known as the Atari FX1, and I actually bought a prototype motherboard, and there's only 26 of these known to exist. I think 2 of them actually work and are complete. The majority of them are missing various bits and pieces, and mine is one of the worst ones known to exist. But still, it does still have pride of place in my museum next door. I was actually going to go in and fetch it, but there's a whole different story about that room that I'll tell you another time. Everything's fine. It's just I've had to dump a load of other stuff in there at a very kind of late notice. Let's not derail this story any further. So yeah, that is my connection to the Falcon and to the Sparrow. Now, there is quite a lot of demand still for the Falcon 30. They still go for ridiculous money on eBay, £2,000 plus. Of course, a lot more than that if you want one complete in a box with all the bits and pieces. And they are still kind of somewhat used in the music industry as well, somewhat, I will say, although there are kind of rack mount options and stuff like that. But there is now a project to bring this back. Now, I have kind of mentioned this in the past, but there is some new footage of this and some new coverage of this, and I thought it was quite exciting. It was posted over on my Discord server, and I wanted to make some more people aware of it. So this is the Falcon project, and this is it, the actual machine being shown at the 2026 Indie Classic Vintage Computer and Video Game Expo. And as we can see here, we have the motherboard here, which has been reverse engineered from the original. We've got one up here, up and running here, running Cubase, and also a rather nice demo unit on this rotating Lazy Susan type arrangement with the back cover off so you can see all the insides. We've got the SIM slots in there and stuff as well. We've got clear cases. We've got injection molded clear cases available as well. And this does also incorporate some fixes and improvements and things. But yeah, this really kind of piqued my interest about this project, and I decided it was about time to go and look into it again. So it has a website, re-falcon.com, which will be linked down below, of course, in the description, along with everything else I talk about in this ramble, as always. I'm sure you're probably familiar with that by now. And this website very much has an old school kind of tech blog type feel to it as well. I remember browsing a lot of websites like this back in the day, back in kind of the late 90s, early 2000s, and just very, being captivated by all of the interesting projects and things that people out there were working on. Of course, we've got YouTube now, but perhaps it does take a little bit of the magic away, he says, as a YouTuber. So, there is some history here, some backstory about the creator of this project. He goes by Sławek. Apparently, well, let's just read his words rather than trying to paraphrase him. My name is Steve, but in the retro community, I go by Sławek. It is the phonetic equivalent of my birth name, Sławek, which I've learned is difficult for most English speakers to pronounce. Anyway, he's a professional electronic circuit and PCB designer with over 3 decades of experience, working in commercial environments on both sides of the Big Pond. Of course, being the Atlantic, I guess, he's designed electronic controls, peripherals, sensor circuits, inverters, power supplies for automotive, access control, gaming and food processing industries. Wonder if he's ever worked on an industrial cake machine. He's based in the California Bay Area, but his home is in Florida. Anyway, that's a little bit about Sławek and the story behind him. And of course, you can go to his website and read all about him. But on the project itself, the story behind this is absolutely fascinating because he's essentially taken the original Falcon motherboard and reverse engineered it. And it is a 6-layer board, so that is no mean feat. And there's talking here about stuff like CT scanning it and stuff like that to see how it all kind of connects together internally. Of course, I can't sit here and explain the entire thing to you in great detail, but if you are interested in a bit of weekend reading on an interesting project, I do highly recommend this website. There's a lot of detail here and a lot of history, and it's just fascinating to see the whole process. But perhaps even more so, fascinating to see this thing up and running for people to actually play with at that show, at the Indie Classic Vintage Computer Expo, and to see this project kind of existing in the flesh. And it looks great with that purple motherboard and stuff as well, doesn't it? So, yeah, really cool project from Sławek. My hat is off to you. The first time I'm taking my hat off. Didn't take my hat off to Ashens, did I? Perhaps I should have done that. My hair's actually starting to look a bit like a hat just lately, isn't it? Like I've got the Lego hair thing going on. I do have a barber's appointment booked on Monday, I promise. But anyway, that's enough distractions. That is the Falcon project. Please do go and check it out. I'm not sure about the commercial availability of this, whether we'll get stuff like Gerbers and stuff so we can get our own fabricated, perhaps at your favourite PCB fabrication business, or if it will actually be available for purchase commercially. And of course, there are custom chips and things in the Falcon as well. There are efforts to recreate those in FPGA and stuff, which of course does all kind of feed into this. But yeah, that is the Falcon project. Really good stuff. So my next story is pretty much the continuation of my ongoing personal nostalgia fest this week, because it's talking about the next step in my computing history, oddly enough, which was 90s PCs, 90s PC gaming. So, of course, we got that Atari ST back in 91, and then Christmas 94, we got a PC, a 486 DX266, and what a wonderful machine that was as well, made by a company called Tiny, British company. I did make a video about that at one point. And the 90s in the world of PCs was a very, very exciting time to be alive, indeed. Because, we had stuff like the internet. A lot of us got online on dial-up for the very first time in the 90s. I appreciate there are people out there who got online a bit earlier than that. We got what's known as multimedia computing, as it was touted at the time. Stuff like CD-ROMs, sound cards, speakers, stuff like Microsoft Encarta playing video on your desktop, albeit postage stamp sized and at about 5 frames per second. But it was very exciting to see at the time. And to kind of put it all into perspective, I think, we started off the decade with stuff like Commander Keen, if you remember that. CGA graphics, PC speaker, or at the very best, something like an ad-lib card with still quite primitive beeps and boops for sound. A 2D kind of side-scrolling platformer type game. I'm sure you're familiar with Commander Keen. And by the end of the decade, we had, well, like Half-Life and Deus Ex. And to think stuff progressed that much in 10 short years, it was insane. It was really insane. We had people, completely replacing the guts of their PC every 6 months. Or, if a PC was 2 years old, it was completely and utterly obsolete back in those days. And it was so exciting, such an exciting time to be a kid. My dad had his own business. They bought a lot of PCs legitimately for the business. They needed very high-end stuff for the kind of engineering work that they were doing. So we got a lot of hand-me-downs and bits of hardware and stuff from them that, of course, inevitably ended up in our home PC. Bit of an arms race and, CD writers and 3D accelerators and all of that kind of stuff. And just before I do get into the meat of this story, which is indeed 3D accelerators and a rather exciting development in that world, I will say, for someone like me. If you think about the last 10 years in PC gaming, of course, 10 years ago we got Doom 2016. Now, that was a really, really technically impressive game at the time, graphically. Some of those huge detailed environments and things. But if you run that game on modern hardware, of course, with all the settings maxed out and stuff, and compare it side by side with a game released, I don't know, this week. I'm not fully up to speed on PC gaming, but I think like Black Myth Wukong was the last thing that I looked at. I mean, of course, the newer stuff does look very, very impressive. Don't get me wrong. We've got loads more polygons. We've got ray tracing. We've got all that kind of stuff going on nowadays that we didn't have 10 years ago. But by and large, to the casual observer, those games don't look all that different. I mean, you compare Doom 2016 to Doom the Dark Ages. Yeah, you're going to say Doom the Dark Ages, oh, what an impressive looking game. But it's no Commander Keen versus Half-Life, is it? I mean, is it, really, being honest? I mean, the 90s was just... It was amazing how quickly stuff was moving. Anyway, I'm sure I've probably over-laboured that point by now in that way that I do. Now, we got, eventually, getting to the point, a Voodoo 3 card. Now, of course, I was familiar with the Voodoo cards. I had seen them running in PCs and seen what they were capable of. But the Voodoo 3 was our very own kind of, first experience with a proper 3D accelerator card. And it came with Unreal, the original single-player Unreal, if you remember that. It had that really impressive castle kind of fly-around demo at the beginning. And it had a few other games bundled as well. But... yeah, I have since, of course, gone back and experienced the original Voodoo cards, which you would connect up in parallel with your graphics card. It would, of course, pipe the output through that. Perhaps most famously, or most recently seen on my channel in that MMX 233 machine. In my Pico IDE demo, of all things, my review, I did show off some, GL Quake, which was the Voodoo version of Quake, which still looks very impressive. I mean, it's still super, super smooth to play to this day. For a game that's 30 years old, it really is worth checking out. But yeah, I think there is a very fond place in the hearts of PC fans for those 3DFX Voodoo cards because they just were so revolutionary at the time. Stop gushing, Reese. Get on with the story. Right, so... this was posted on my Discord server again this week, and I love this. This is fantastic. So... this is hackaday.com. The 3DFX Voodoo lives again in an FPGA. So someone has created the original 3DFX Voodoo card from, I think it was 96, the original Voodoo was released, or maybe it was 95. Someone has completely reverse engineered this and created the entire thing in an FPGA chip. Of course, field programmable gate array chips. They can be used to replicate any kind of, chips, any kind of TTL type logic, and perhaps most famously in the retro world, used in the Mister, that can play anything from your original Pong games all the way up to sort of PlayStation, Sega Saturn, that kind of era of gaming, then 64. And as you probably know, I am a huge fan of the Mister, but its PC credentials are perhaps a little bit limited. We have kind of a higher end 486, lower end kind of Pentium type system running on there, but then we have kind of really hit the limits of what's possible with the D10 and the Cyclone chip that is used as the basis of that project. So this isn't that. This is a different FPGA, but it is a kind of a much more universal kind of plug-and-play solution, which should hopefully lead to some more FPGA-based 3D accelerators for retro PCs, which is always good. Anyway, The story here by Jenny List on Hackaday.com reads, the 3DFX Voodoo was not the first dedicated 3D graphics chipset by any means. But it became the favourite for gamers among the early mass-market GPUs. It would be found on a 3D processing-only PCI card that sat on the feature connector of your SVGA card. The Voodoo took any game that supported its Glide API into the world of, for the time, smooth and beautiful 3D. They're worth a bit now, but if you don't fancy forking out for mid-90s silicon in 2026, there's another option. Francisco Ayala Lebrun has re-implemented the 3DFX Voodoo 1 in Spinal HDL for FPGAs. And it just goes on here to explain the post that we're just about to take a look at. The SVGA feature connector thing, was that more of a Voodoo 2 thing? I remember the original. In fact, I have an original. I was using one very recently. Just used a VGA pass-through, and it was just a PCI card that sat alongside your existing 2D graphics card, which is the S3 Verge, in my case, which did also have some 3D accelerating capabilities built into it. Of course, famously covered in a video on my main channel, ctrl-alt-rees. Anyway, looking at this rather impressive project, this is Screamer 2, a game that should need no introduction for 90s PC gaming fans, a huge favourite of mine as well. This frame of Screamer 2 was rendered not by an original 3DFX card and not by an emulator, but by an FPGA re-implementation of the Voodoo 1 that I wrote in Spinal HDL, and this is available on GitHub as well. What surprised me was not just that it worked, it was that a design like this can now be described, simulated and debugged by one person, provided the tools let you express the architecture directly and inspect execution at the right level of abstraction. The Voodoo 1 is old, but it is not simple. It has no transform and lighting hardware and no programmable shaders, so all of its graphics behavior is fixed in silicon. Gradients for Gouraud shading, texture sampling, MIP mapping, bilinear and trilinear filtering, alpha clipping, depth testing, fog, and more. A modern GPU concentrates much of its complexity in flexible programming units. The Voodoo concentrates it in a large number of hardwired rendering behaviors. Of course, that's a really important difference between the Voodoo cards and modern GPUs. And of course, the original GeForce cards, I think, were the first cards that had like hardware TML and stuff like that on board. Someone's probably going to correct me down in the comments, but it's not that important, is it? Anyway, one of the bugs that drove this home looked at first like a frame buffer hazard. Small clusters of partially translucent text and overlay pixels would go mysteriously transparent, even though most of the frame looked fine. The real issue turned out not to be one broken subsystem, but several small hardware accuracy mismatches stacking up in exactly the wrong way. That bug ended up being a good summary of the whole project. The hard part was not making triangles appear, it was matching the Voodoo's exact behavior closely enough that the wrong pixels stopped appearing. And this is it's not a hugely long post, but it is quite an interesting post for someone like me, a bit of a dum-dum like me, who doesn't know about the inner workings of GPUs and that kind of stuff, but is very interested in that kind of stuff and very nostalgic and passionate about the technology. I found this fascinating. I think a lot of you out there will too, and perhaps a lot of you will explain it or will understand it a lot better than I did. But yeah, really fascinating project, and all of the code has been made available on GitHub as well. So if you have access to FPGAs, you can perhaps turn this into some kind of project that you can actually use. Of course, the author here does have this. What's the name of the author? It did say, didn't it? I do apologise, Francisco. I was thinking San Francisco there. Yeah, of course, Francisco here has actually got this connected up and got it rendering Screamer 2, presumably connected to a PC, which is really cool to see. And it doesn't seem like, some kind of hardware, recreation of the original Voodoo cards could be all that far off for kind of the hobbyist market and for retro computing enthusiasts, which I think is very, very exciting because those cards are becoming increasingly rare. They are very historically important and very interesting as well. So, yeah, great to see another bit of historic hardware being saved by hobbyists and another big leap in complexity, I think it's fair to say. Excellent, excellent work. Time to talk about another fantastic recreation of another iconic piece of hardware from the past now. And rather than FPGA, I know that this is something that has been done in FPGA. This is something that uses the Pico, the Raspberry Pi Pico microcontroller. Of course, covered quite recently on my own channel in the form of the Pico IDE and Polpo's excellent projects like the Pico Gus and, there was the Pico Mem. I covered that as well. All sorts of really cool retro computing projects using the Raspberry Pi Pico as its base. Of course, they are software emulation based rather than, of course, the hardware based. I'm going to use the word emulation of the FPGA, but still, I think no less worthy and still serve a very, very important purpose in keeping these old machines and things alive and allowing people to experience the stuff pretty much as it was back in the day, or at least in a very authentic way, I think, without the cost of the original hardware. Anyway, this isn't a sound card, and it isn't a memory upgrade. It isn't a 3D accelerator. This is a whole CPU, and a CPU that you may well be familiar with. So another story here from Hackaday. This is the Pico Z80. I'm going to refer to this as the Z80. Apologies to the Americans in the audience who know this as the Z80, but I just can't bring myself to do it. I'm sorry, I'm happy to say Gen Z. That's an American thing. Anyway, also one of the longest produced CPUs as well. I think until very, very recently, you could actually still buy brand new Z80 CPUs for industrial applications and things. Here in the UK, perhaps known best as the CPU that powered the ZX Spectrum. Of course, not the ZX Spectrum. Anyway, Pico Z80 is a drop-in replacement for everyone's favourite Zilog CPU, writes Tyler August over on hackaday.com. Everything will be linked down below if you want to go and give it a read. The Z80 has been gone a couple of years now, but it's very much not forgotten. Still, the day when new old stock and salvaged DIP 40 package Z80s will be hard to come by is slowly approaching, and EAW is going to be ready with the Pico Z80 project. You can probably guess where this is going. An RP2350B on a DIP 40 size PCB can easily sit on the bus and emulate a Z80. It can do so with only one core without breaking a sweat. It's funny that we can emulate an entire CPU in software and actually turn it into a piece of hardware that we can stick into the original hardware, and it just works. I mean, such is progress. That left EAW a second core to play with, allowing the Pico Z80 to act as a heck of an accelerator, memory expander, USB host, disk emulator, you name it. He even tossed in an ESP32 coprocessor to act as a Wi-Fi, Bluetooth and SD card controller to use as a virtual, wirelessly accessible disk drive. Of course, with direct access to the actual guts of the CPU, in software, you can hook into that, you can modify things ever so slightly to your heart's content and add in a load of extra new functionality. And all you really need is kind of drivers or software for these old machines that can take advantage of that, which is absolutely brilliant. That's me talking, not the article, by the way, for the benefit of our audio listeners. Anyway, the onboard RAM that comes with an RP2350B would be generous by 1980 standards, but EAW bumped that up with an 8MB SP RAM chip, accessed in 64 pages of 64 kilobytes each. Naturally, if more RAM than a very pricey hard drive wasn't luxury enough, there's also 16 megabytes of flash memory available. That's configured to store ROM images that are transferred to the RAM at boot. The virtual Z80 isn't grabbing from the flash at runtime in EAW's architecture because apparently there are limits to how much he wants to boost his retro machines. There are already drivers to use in certain Z80 systems. You can, of course, configure it as a bare Z80 with no machine-specific emulation, or set up the Pico Z80 with the persona of a classic Z80 machine. So far, EAW has tried this on an RC 2014 homebrew computer, a Sharp MZ80A, which was seen before in miniature on Hackaday apparently, and a Sharp MZ700. That's an interesting selection, isn't it? And apparently the Amstrad PCW8256, of course that was a word processor, wasn't it? Although I think there were some games and things available on that platform. And the Taitung TC01 are apparently next. And there you go. So If you somehow missed it, now this was what I was talking about earlier, if you somehow missed it, the venerable Z80 only hit end of life in 2024, so supplies won't be drying up anytime soon. This hack is really more about the quality of life add-ons this allows. Come back in a decade and we'll see if the RP2350 lasts longer than the stack of new old stock Z80s. And there is a link to the website here, Engineers at Work, eaw.app/Pico Z80. We have a much more detailed overview of the project here, which of course describes this as a drop-in Z80 replacement that adds a load of extra stuff, as we have already discussed. Perhaps most interestingly, that ESP32, which adds Wi-Fi and Bluetooth as well, an SD card storage, and a browser-based management interface, much like the Pico IDE, which we were looking at a moment ago. It's like the Pico and the ESP32 just go hand in hand, don't they? It's so cool to see the way that people are combining them in these projects. Just really good stuff. There is loads of technical detail here, absolutely loads of really, really in-depth technical specs and all of that kind of stuff. We've got PCB designs stuff here. We've got all of the schematics and things, the architecture, how it works in great detail at a very low level. So great to see how well this has all been documented, and it's a very, very thorough and very impressive project, I will say, to help support all of those old Z80-based systems and perhaps become the basis for some new ones, maybe, with all of that extra modern functionality. So brilliant project this. Please do go and check it out, the Pico Z80. I mean, I caught the tail end of these kind of 1980s 8-bit systems as a kid, and to see that, a whole CPU in software with a load of extra modern stuff added on top of it as well. It's amazing what the community is coming out with just lately, and that's why I like to showcase it all here and make you aware of all of their excellent work. So there you go, Engineers at Work. Again, my hat is off. A brilliant project, and cool to see where this goes with the Pico Z80. Some rather interesting news from the Apple camp this week. As you may know, I am a Mac user, a dirty Mac user myself. I do have my M1 MacBook Air here, which is starting to get a little bit long in the tooth, but still an excellent machine. I will be using it to edit this Ramble when I'm finished, and I do use it to edit all of my main channel videos as well. So perhaps not that bad. The battery still lasts all day. It's still completely fanless. It's still very light. But anyway, I want a new one. But yeah, the Mac Pro is the complete opposite end of the scale. Of course, the MacBook Air is the smallest and perhaps a less powerful, more portable machine in Apple's range. The Mac Pro was the absolute top of the range, best of the best in class hardware. Starting off as the Power Mac, of course, which I have featured on the channel in the past. I do have that dual Xeon Power Mac machine, which was very exciting. The G5, which immediately preceded that, was marketed at the time as the world's most powerful home computer, I believe. Came with liquid cooling and stuff as standard, which was pretty crazy back in the day. But very sad to see that the Mac Pro range has now been officially discontinued. And it appears that this would be forever as well, as it has been replaced by the Mac Studio. So, story here over on 9to5mac.com. Story by Chance Miller. Apple discontinues the Mac Pro with no plans for future hardware. Of course, we've got the iconic cheese grater machine there, as it became known, because it looks like a cheese grater, not because you should actually use it as a cheese grater. But the story reads, it's the end of an era. Apple has confirmed to 9to5Mac that the Mac Pro is being discontinued. It has been removed from Apple's website as of Thursday afternoon. The buy page on Apple's website for the Mac Pro now redirects to the Mac's homepage, where all references have been removed. Apple has also confirmed to 9to5Mac that it has no plans to offer future Mac Pro hardware. Sad times, the end of a bit of a big name in the computing world, even if you're not an Apple fan. I understand, there are many reasons not to be an Apple fan. But anyway, Mac Studio is the future. The Mac Pro has lived many lives over the years. Apple released the current Mac Pro industrial design in 2019, alongside the Pro Display XDR, which was also discontinued this month. And that version of the Mac Pro was powered by Intel. Apple refreshed it with the M2 Ultra chip in June 2023. And it has gone without an update since then, languishing at its $6,999 price point, even as Apple debuted the M3 Ultra chip in the Mac Studio last year. Of course, those I think we're on M4 nowadays, and the Ultra kind of being the absolute top of the range of those. Apple Silicon, of course, it is an ARM-based architecture, and I'm a huge fan of Apple Silicon, I have to say, as someone who's had an M1 for 6 years now. You know, the power saving and this thing blew me away when I first got it, and it still surprises me today just how good it really is. I'm going to get some flack for that, but whatever. Anyway, with that in mind, the Mac Studio is clearly set up to be the pro desktop Mac of the future in Apple's lineup. The Mac Studio can be configured with the M3 Ultra chip and a 32-core CPU. An 80-core GPU paired with 256 gig of unified memory and 16 terabytes of SSD storage. With the discontinuation of the Mac Pro today, Apple now sells 3 desktop Macs. We've got the iMac, the Mac Mini and the Mac Studio. And we've got 3 laptops, which are the Neo, which was recently announced, of course, using the iPhone chip, the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro. To me, this is the strongest Mac lineup in years, and perhaps the strongest Mac lineup ever. This is especially true with the recent addition of the MacBook Neo in the entry-level spot. There are options spanning dramatically different price points, configurations and form factors. I will say, as someone who isn't familiar with the Studio, just to give my thoughts on this, the one thing that the Mac Pro really had going for it, certainly in the early days with the Power Mac and stuff, was just how upgradable it was. I mean, if you saw that video of mine, you know, you had standard SATA hard disks in there. You could stick, PCI Express GPUs and other bits of PCI Express hardware in there. You could upgrade the RAM. It was just standard, like server RAM in there. You could upgrade the CPUs, those dual Xeon CPUs. You could take those out and stick your own in. And very kind of PC-like in its construction and its design and its upgradability. And the modern Macs are moving even further away from that. Of course, Apple hasn't always had a brilliant reputation for upgradability and serviceability, and that is certainly true of their kind of current lineup. I don't know if that's the case with the Mac Studio. Perhaps someone who's more familiar with it could let me know. But yeah, sad to lose that range, I think, purely for that reason. I know for a fact that this thing isn't upgradable at all. I had to spec it with the 1 terabyte SSD and stuff at the time, which of course I paid through the nose for. But I guess I have had my money's worth over the years. Anyway, so that is that. Just a bit of a footnote in the history of Apple, I guess. Very silently, very quietly, and without fanfare, discontinuing the Mac Pro, one of the perhaps most important models of its past. I will say, I think I disagree with Chance Miller's take here of this being the strongest lineup in Apple history. We've certainly had some more impressive machines in the past. But anyway, that's my take as someone who's only kind of vaguely interested in this stuff. Let me know what you think about Macs down in the comments. It'll be good for engagement. So up next, I have a bit of a selection of stories for you. I actually have 5 in total, although to call one of these a story is perhaps a bit of a stretch. It's just a cool thing that I wanted to show to you. But the point of this is that I don't really have any kind of in-depth opinions on these. I'm not going to sit here and turn each one of these into its own segment and try to find something to say. I mean, I ramble on at the best of times at trying to entertain you with my random wafflings from deep in the depths of my brain. And a lot of you keep coming back every week, so I guess you enjoy them. But yeah, in this case, I don't think I can speak with any kind of authority on a lot of these stories and haven't had a lot of time to look into them. And you know what? Rather than making excuses, let's just get straight into this. So I've done this in the past. I've never had a name for this segment. I still don't have a name for it. But let's have a bit of a quick fire round of news stories for this week. So we have a couple of stories here from timeextension.com. The first one is about Jetpac, which has been unofficially remade. Now, I thought there had been a few remakes of Jetpac in recent years. I say in recent years. I guess some of them are probably getting on for 20 years old or whatever. And this is an unofficial one. I believe there was one on the Spectrum Next, which was official, but by far not my area of expertise. Hence, I don't really want to talk too much about this. But anyway, indie coder Richard Langford has remade Ultimate Play the Game's 1983 classic Jetpac for the PC. The story goes on to talk about, of course, the Stamper brothers and how Jetpac came about, a legendary story in the world of the ZX Spectrum and British bedroom coders, which I'm sure a lot of you out there are familiar with already. And this does incorporate some other bits and pieces. There's a missile launcher from the sequel, Lunar Jetman, and there are also some extra enemies here, which came from Cookie and Psst, which are two more games from Ultimate Play the Game's back catalogue. Now, you can download this for free, or indeed you can choose to name your price if you want to throw some money the developer's way. This is apparently now owned by Microsoft these days. Apparently they own the rights to Jetpac somehow. And it is, it says here, it is still very much a bankable property for the company, as it was included on the Rare Replay and the more recent Rare Collection 1 for the Evercade. And there is also, there we go, an official HD remake in 2007 called Jetpac Refueled. But if you want to check out another remake of Jetpac for the PC, which is free, so why not? And also incorporates some quite interesting sounding elements. It's a very cute looking game. I'm sure it's probably worth at least 5 minutes of your time, or perhaps let the kids have a crack at it. That is that. So, of course, all of these will be linked down below. But moving on to the next story, we have some more Arcade Archives stuff being released. A revolutionary Namco racer and a classic Nichibutsu shoot-'em-up are both heading to consoles this week. I have, of course, talked about these releases in previous rambles, so I don't want to miss this one as well. We've got Arcade Archives Final Lap and Console Archives Terra Cresta have been announced. Not familiar... I was going to say I'm not familiar with these, but I think I am actually familiar with Final Lap and Terra Cresta. The Japanese company Hamster has announced the next couple of games coming to Arcade Archives and Console Archives. And indeed, they are Final Lap and Terra Cresta. And apparently Final Lap was released in 1980. Oh, yes, I do know this game. Yeah, the successor to Pole Position. Yeah, Pole Position 2. And brought on by the Japanese Grand Prix being held that year at the then newly refurbished Suzuka Circuit. First time a Japanese track had been included since the 1977 Formula One World Championship in Fuji. Anyway, there's a lot more information here about the game. That has now been released, and it is $7.99 or $9.99, depending on what platform you buy it on. So PS4 and Switch, or indeed Switch 2, PS5, Xbox Series. And it includes a load of features not present in the arcade original, like online leaderboards, additional modes, including a time attack mode, and screen filters. So that's cool. And of course, we've got Terra Cresta as well. And Nichibutsu's vertically scrolling shoot-'em-up, which was released for the Famicom in 1986. I do like a Famicom game. I love the Famicom. That, of course, has also been released yesterday, as at the time of recording, March the 26th. 26th, and that's available for the Switch 2 and the PS5, priced at $7.99. It's the sequel to Moon Cresta, and originally debuted in arcades in 1985 before being ported to a bunch of home platforms, including the Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, Famicom/NES, and X68000 in the years that followed. And I'm sure you're familiar with the format if you've ever played anything like Xevious or any of these kind of top-down vertical shooters, but a really nice example of an early home conversion of a particularly good one. Like I say, it's the sequel to Moon Cresta, so it can't be that bad, can it? There you go, 2 new releases for arcade fans this week. To completely change tack on our next story, this is one all about Linux compatibility with Windows games, which of course is something that I talk about quite a lot in these rambles and also on ctrl-alt-rees as well. I tend to focus on stuff like Bazzite and SteamOS, of course using that Proton compatibility layer. But this is about Wine. Wine has been around for the longest time in the Linux world and of course been used to run Windows software on Linux forever. And, has always been pretty successful at that. Of course, I think there are bits and pieces of Wine in Proton. And, with it being open source and whatnot. But very much was not kind of focused on games initially. It did run games, but perhaps more to do with productivity software, office software, and that kind of thing. I think that's fair to say. But, of course, getting games working is always a bonus. But there have been some major rewrites under the hood of this latest Wine release. This is a brand new full major version release. This is Wine 11. And this has had some very, very impressive performance kind of impacts on this platform, on this compatibility layer. A story here by Adam Conway on xdadevelopers.com. So if you are interested in this, you can go and read all about that. It's not just another yearly release, explains Adam, with a few hundred bug fixes and some compatibility tweaks. Represents a huge number of changes and bug fixes. Also ships with NT Sync support, which is a feature that has been years in the making and rewrites how Wine handles one of the most performance-sensitive operations in modern gaming. On top of that, the WoW 64 architecture overhaul is finally complete. The Wayland driver has grown up a lot, and there's a big list of smaller improvements that collectively make this feel like an all-new project. Not every game is going to see a night and day difference. Some titles will run identically to before, but for games that do benefit from these changes, the improvements range from noticeable to absurd. And because Proton, SteamOS and every downstream project builds on top of Wine, those gains trickle down to everyone. And it goes on to explain in quite some technical detail about eSync, F-Sync, and this new one, which I've already forgotten the name of, NT-Sync. And if you are interested in the technical implementation details of that, and of course the performance implications for modern games, this is a very good read and well worth going and checking out. But perhaps a little bit above my level of expertise. So I'll let you read that yourself. Finally, some rather, I do at least need to acknowledge this, although not great news again in the games industry, and I do apologise for being the bearer of bad news in what is otherwise a rather upbeat edition of Reese Rambles, but layoffs at Epic Games, of course, started off back in the day as Epic Mega Games. I think Jazz Jackrabbit was my favourite Epic Mega Games game, but they certainly published a lot of stuff over the years. And again, as is the story, every single week in the industry, more layoffs in the games development industry. 1,000 Epic employees. And this is to do with the downturn in Fortnite engagement that started in 2025, apparently. And $500 million of cost savings in contracting, marketing, and closing some open roles to put the company in a more stable place. So Fortnite, one of the most successful games in the world, it says here in this press release, apparently the kids aren't playing it anymore. They don't like it as much, and that has had a direct impact on Epic's bottom line. I'm sure this has nothing to do with replacing a load of employees with AI, but I don't know because I haven't really read into this. So very sad stuff. Of course, I know a lot of people in the industry, and there is a lot of kind of doubt and uncertainty going on, and there has been for the past couple of years now. And some of the most important people in the entertainment industry. But there we go. I am very sorry if this has affected you personally. One more thing that was posted on my Discord server that I just wanted to make you aware of, and again will be linked down below, is this virtual Atari ST, which was posted by our good friend Manimo. So thank you to Manimo for posting this. I have no idea what this is about. I've just had a bit of fun having a poke around and a bit of a play with this, but it is fun to play with. Look at that, I just noticed the reflection in the window as well. That's quite clever. It's a 3D rendered little office/living room type scene. You can swing the view around, and this is just like kind of suspended in space, which is quite fun. And there is an Atari ST here on the desk that you can play with. You can click around with it, and if you mouse over the monitor here, you can actually explore the desktop, and you can see what software and games and things are installed on this machine, and go and have a play with those if you like. If you've never used an Atari ST, you could spend a quick 5 minutes here just getting to know what it's about. This is running EmuTOS, which is an emulated, a kind of modern day implementation of the Atari ST operating system, TOS, of course. I say operating system, obviously. Details. But it's just a fun little thing to poke around and play with for 5 minutes. And apparently this was made by Mesmotronic for the 40th birthday of the Atari ST. Of course, it was launched in 1985, so I guess this has been around since last year. It's only just come up on our radar. So go and have a play with that. And all the rest of that quickfire round, if anything is of interest, you can check that out. Links down in the description, as mentioned. And that, my dearest ramblers, brings us around rather neatly to my regular Videos of the Week feature, wherein I feature videos that I have seen here on the old YouTubes in the past week that have entertained, inspired, educated, or otherwise made my life better in some small way. Sometimes they are retro computing and technology related, sometimes they aren't. Sometimes there's one video, sometimes there's more than one. But this week I have 2 videos for you, and these both firmly fall into the YouTube news category. This is to do with stuff that is happening with some YouTube channels that you may be familiar with. One of them is a very close personal friend of mine, and the other one is quite a big name in the YouTube world and quite big news. This has caused quite the stir. And the first one is a bit of a cautionary tale as well for those of us who have YouTube channels. But of course, this affects people who watch those channels as well, because if your favourite channels disappear because of stupid policies that have been put in place by YouTube and perhaps incorrectly enforced, then that affects all of us in a negative way, doesn't it? So just wanted to raise some awareness of this and also lend my support. This is Rose Tinted Spectrum, one of the nicest chaps I know, and he has a channel that originally started off covering Spectrum games. He was doing these very, very funny, ridiculous over-the-top reviews of Spectrum games. He did some live streaming of those as well, which were great to watch. And he kind of branched out into PC games, that kind of thing, and then turned his hand to 90s children's TV, stuff like Games Master and Rosie and Jim, stuff like that. And this guy, perhaps best known for his series Breaking Bad Influence, I will say. Of course, Bad Influence was a really big kind of gaming TV show aimed at kids here in the UK back in the 90s, and he completely and utterly tore it apart and quite deservedly got an awful lot of views on that series. And has, like I say, branched out to cover a load of other stuff. But he has now been hit by the YouTube reused content policy. Now, this policy was originally put in place by YouTube to stop people reposting stuff they didn't own the rights to, stuff like entire movies, or at least kind of substantial clips of movies, TV programs, that kind of thing. And that is quite understandable, I will say. If you don't own those things, you don't really have the right to kind of repost them for everyone to watch and to profit from them. I think that's quite a reasonable take. That is very much not what Rosie here was doing. I will say his real name is Dave. It's not Rosie, but everyone calls him Rosie for obvious reasons. That's not what Rosie was doing here. He's taken this footage and he has remixed it into something completely and utterly different, uses it to tell this ridiculous story. Obviously, it's a running commentary on these old TV programs, his own opinions, and it's all very, very funny. But apparently YouTube didn't see it that way and didn't see it as fair use. Of course, parody and commentary and all of that. I mean, it fits into multiple categories. And they, without warning, demonetized his entire channel. And also, basically, this was an automated thing and made it very, very difficult for him to appeal against it. Now, I know Rosie personally, and I do know that he has some personal stuff going on at the moment that means that basically, not only is YouTube a substantial part of his household income, but it's kind of pretty much... his only household income at the moment, and he's now had to go a month without any kind of income, and it is directly affecting his ability to pay his bills and stuff. Now, thankfully, his community have really stepped up over on Patreon and, really kind of chipped in, myself included. Of course, I'm part of his Patreon community, and it's nice to see people rallying around and supporting him. And this story does have a happy ending insofar as... the channel has now been manually reviewed and they have now remonetized it, which is great to see. People complain about YouTubers wanting to make money from their, you should do it for the fun of it. You should do it for the love of it. No, why are you trying to make money from your work? But in his case, he's actually having a proper go at this as a job to pay his bills at home, as I certainly did at one point, and I still am to some extent. And to have that suddenly taken away without any kind of notice through no fault of his own and have this very obscure and opaque appeals process to try to get it back, very, very stressful. It's a story we keep seeing time and time again with YouTube channels. And thankfully, this is one that does have a positive outcome. So Great, interesting video and an insight into the process and what the rules are, the content that he was making and how some of those rules kind of apply to him or don't apply to him, and also the appeals process. It's 8.5 minutes long, and it's a bit of a fascinating insight into kind of the life of the YouTuber, I guess, and some of the perils that we face on a day-to-day basis and kind of what goes on behind the scenes. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, please do go and watch his video. And also, if you are not subscribed to his channel, if you're not familiar with his stuff, please do go and check out some of his other videos. Like I say, his Breaking Bad Influence series was excellent. It is hilarious. He has gone on to do even bigger and better things. So that is that. Rosie. Nice to see a good friend of mine finally getting some justice. Not the first time something like this has happened to his channel either, I will say. The second story, however, is, the second video, I will say, is a bit more positive. This is the return of Tom Scott. That's right. Iconic British YouTuber, one of the old school YouTubers, has been around since the very early days. He makes really interesting videos, traveling all over the world, looking at just random interesting stuff. You're probably familiar with Tom Scott, I will say, if you watch any amount of YouTube. If you're not, you're in for a treat when you go and check out his back catalogue, unless for some reason you've already decided you don't like him. I think it's fairly inoffensive, but there you go. But he left YouTube 2 years ago. He basically said that he'd had enough, he was burnt out, he'd done weekly videos for something like, what was it, like I want to say 7 years. It was probably a lot longer than that. But it was an insane amount of work, his channel. And he basically decided that he'd run out of ideas, he'd burnt himself out on it, and he just wanted to step away from the whole thing and wasn't sure when he'd be back. That was 2 years ago, and now he's back. He's filmed a whole new series where he basically visits every single county in England. Is it England or is it the UK? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. They are going to start being released weekly on YouTube, and he also takes the opportunity to push Nebula as well, which is kind of a YouTuber-owned video hosting platform. The episodes will be released on there first. That is a paid-for platform. I think he says it's $2.50 a month, something like that. I'm sure I was subscribed to Nebula at some point, but I just kept forgetting it existed and never used it. But yeah, they're on YouTube, so you can go and watch his big comeback video on the links down below. My videos of the week links down below in the description if you want to know what that's all about. And that's that. It's only a very quick one, 1 minute 40 seconds. We've got Rosie's tale of his channel being demonetized and then remonetized, which is also quite an interesting look into how the sausage is made. The sausage being YouTube videos, of course. But that's that. That's all I've got for you for this week's Ramble. So big thank you to my Discord members, Katrina, Gravitone, DBK, Tim's Retro Corner, Naoki's Retro Corner, Technic, Sozzled, and Manimo. Again, of course, my regulars who post and discuss all of these stories over on the Discord. You are free to join them if you like. There is a link down in the description to join my Discord server. We talk about all sorts of other stuff as well. And that's that. That's all I've got for you from the worlds of vintage and retro computing, gaming and technology for this week. This goes out at 2 minutes to midnight every Friday night UK time on my second channel, youtube.com/Reese Rambles, and also on all of the podcast platforms as well, starting with Spotify and then apparently getting pushed out somehow from there and beyond to all of the others. But that's that. That's all you need to know. If anything in this ramble has piqued your interest, you can check out the links down below. But that's all I've got for you for this week. I'm going to go outside and enjoy the, I was going to say the sunshine, but I did stick my head out of the window a minute ago, and apparently it's now raining. So there you go. If that doesn't sum up the British springtime for you, I don't know what does. I've also got to go and have a big tidy up outside, because apparently there are some more builders showing up and destroying this place even more than they have been. So yeah, you move into a new studio, 6 months later the building starts getting demolished around you. Such is the plight of the YouTuber. Anyway, that's all I've got for you. I'm going to shut up now. Thank you very much. Goodbye.